Thanks for listening to Just About Managing. To stay up to date with new episodes, remember to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and discover what comes next on our LinkedIn page.
Welcome back to the Just About Managing podcast, everyone. Welcome today. We are one member down, unfortunately, so best wishes to Chris at the moment. He won't be able to join us, unfortunately, but we are joined by our first returning guest. And you'll probably remember Craig from one of the sessions we did earlier in one of the seasons, and we also then reviewed the session. There was that much content in there. And John wasn't able to make it, unfortunately. That John, Chris, and myself then spent an hour reviewing what Craig had talked about. And one of the things, for those of you who listen to that, one of the things you'll remember in there is that we said we'd try to get Craig back again in 6 months' time to review some of the political changes that were going on at the time with Starmer coming in as PM, etc. See where that took us. Now, in typical Craig fashion, he's come prepared. He has a few things to talk about, so I'm sure there's lots for us to cover in here, and I'm sure there'll be future podcasts for us as well. So welcome, everybody, again.
Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, and again, I'd say first time you two have met, obviously, because you weren't here last time, John, as we said.
Yes, exactly. As I was bizarrely saying, though, by listening and watching the it back twice, it did feel like that I was actually there. So, yeah, the powers of modern technology. Yes.
Completely.
I look forward to today, Craig.
Excellent.
Well, thanks for having me back, guys.
Not at all. Always welcome. I think the first thing to start on, probably, Craig, is going back to where we left last time. So I think the record went out slightly differently, but we actually recorded that the day of the election results, wasn't it? So it was the morning that we found out that surprisingly, that Keir Starmer was going to be Prime Minister. And we talked about setting him up for success and what he should do. And I suppose, what's your initial thoughts on that, Craig, from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting because he won with a landslide, but I think that the numbers show it wasn't a huge, massive popular vote win. You know, there were a number of other parties who picked up and candidates that picked up votes, but the way that our system works, he's got a huge majority. And what's been interesting observing that since then has been the fact that he doesn't have to think short term. And I think when I spoke last time, I talked about the challenge that leaders typically have in business, in sport, pretty much and in politics in a lot of cases, where you have to balance the long term with the short term. So the sporting analogy is the manager says, hey, I've got this great plan for a new academy. Our recruiting program is going to look like this. We're going to go and we're going to team up with another club in South America, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. And of course, what then comes back, that's fine, that's great, but you're going to win on Saturday. And by the way, we lost on Saturday last week. So, you know, that's all great. And by the way, that's why we hired you in, because you've got these great long-term plans, but they're useless if you don't win on Saturday. But of course, and you know, in a CEO's world, he's got a 5-year plan, but the shareholders want their dividend in the 6th month or the end of year. And the senior leadership want their bonuses paid, which are pretty much based on a quarterly performance. So, yeah, okay, you're talking about 2 years hence, but if your numbers don't look good in March, you know, we've got a problem. So, but what Starmer's got is this massive majority, which means I can actually upset a few people in the first few years because I've got long-term certainty. So he's been the sort of opposite to what I call populism. He doesn't have to do something which keeps everyone happy on Saturday. He can say, I'm going to take a bit of a risk here. Let's build 1.5 million houses, and everyone gets upset. But what he's banking on is that even if it's not 1.5 million, it's a few 100,000 more. That he's eased the pressure on the housing situation, and people see that as a plus. But he doesn't have to do it by Saturday. So it's a luxury he's got. I think last time we said his culture, he was getting a very disciplined culture in, and I think he's still got that. You know, not many rogues in the cabinet who are bad-mouthing him in front of the press.
Do you think there's a blend there, though, with him of there is a deliberate, I've got this amazing majority, I'm just going to keep my head down and stick to my guns. And reality in life, modern world, a lot of people have quite short memories. Is there a little bit of also that actually his natural inclination to being a little bit tone deaf and actually a little bit disconnected from the real world, ironically, is kind of playing into his long-term plan as well at the moment?
Yeah, he is. I mean, I think he's doing what others don't have the ability to, which, as you say, he's just being deaf to a lot of the criticism that's coming in. And I gather, his popularity ratings are awful at the moment. But I think he's banking on the fact that he thinks that, this is unpopular now, but I said I'd do it, and we're gonna see where we go. Now, there'll come a point where someone has to go, hang on, this is really going pear-shaped. We've got to think differently. But he's certainly managed to keep the discipline in his cabinet that Sunak wasn't able to keep in his. Now, quite why, I'm not close enough to understand that. But he has been. It's interesting to see where his priorities have been since, because we're going to talk, I think, a lot more about visibility of leaders and leadership as we go through this morning.
Do you think that discipline is, and you kind of think about gestation of being a leader and that comfort in that position in an organization and status, and if you kind of take that parallel in a corporate organization to Conservatives, they've been in power quite some time. Yes, there were some new faces, but there's quite a bit revolving door of individuals cycling between different ministerial roles that actually, because of that comfort they had, meant that there were more leaks, that they each had their own established fiefdoms and hierarchy within the organisation, whereas Labour have been out of power for so long, virtually everyone, apart from one or two, it's like going to your new secondary school, isn't it? Everyone's trying to find their places. Everyone's at the moment towing the line because they don't really know that the whole setup. Do you think there's parallels of that as to why we're not seeing that dissension?
Yeah, I think there is. I think that in a large, successful organisation over time, people forget who the opposition are. So my own experience at Coca-Cola, I think I mentioned this last time, was that when people said to you, we were outselling Britvic at the time by about 4-1, and people would say to me, Craig, who are you competing with? Who is the opposition? And I'd say, well, Yorkshire. Coca-Cola Enterprises Yorkshire. Let's not even think about the opposition. So a lot of the fighting, the sort of opposition was seen to be internal rather than outside. Yeah, you're right. Labour having now got in, they haven't got to that stage where they're all infighting yet and thinking, well, the opposition's inside. Who knows? In 2-3 years' time, it may change. But right now, yeah, you've gone from a party that's been in power for 14 years, and they've forgotten and become complacent for who actually the opposition are. All that time, energy and effort that was spent on internal leadership fights, as opposed to how can we win the next election. So, no, you're right. It's a feature of an organisation that's become complacent and they've forgotten who they're actually competing with. Yeah, I think he's still, because his priority at the moment seems to be the global perception of the UK. He's away again today, I think, isn't he? So he's doing a lot of travel and a lot of presenting us externally rather than dealing with something, focusing internally. Let's see what happens.
I think one of the things that does sort of strike back to what you said 6 months ago again, Craig, when we talked about it was, if you said if I could give him one piece, maybe listen to the podcast, you never know actually, but you said if I could give him one piece of advice, it would be to pick your team and stick with it.
Yeah.
And after we're only 6 months in, 6 months in the previous government, there was a load of change, like you say, to and fro in there. This seems to have created that bit. Yes, there's been issues coming out at times, obviously, with different things going on there. But the stability in that team seems to have been there so far again.
I totally agree. He's. I sort of hope, I don't know, but that if he's in his position, he's also explicitly and deliberately built a team. Rather than a collection of individuals with their own responsibilities, and they're going to start fighting internally for it all. But at the moment, there's a unity there. which is and you're right. I mean, I'm absolutely, the evidence is clear. If you can keep a leadership team together over time, it will be far more successful if you keep chopping and changing. But there will always be change, so you just got to monitor it and deal with it, and have succession plans. But there you go.
How does that then, when you look at that, like, so they have the landslide win from a Labour perspective, but not the popular vote landslide in there. Starmer as a leader, and that unpopular aspect he's got now. How do you compare that to, without getting into politics side of things again, but the US aspect then, when we've seen the Biden, Trump, Kamala Harris play out?
I mean, there's as a case study on how to get it wrong. The Democrats. Oh, I mean, again, none of us, I don't think, spend much time in the US, and we get the external view looking in, so we don't really see what's going on at the bottom. But what struck me, because I remember I was doing a talk in 2015-16 before Trump got in for the first time, and I remember saying that if he got in and he was successful, we're going to have to start rewriting our books on leadership, because he breaks all the rules for what leaders should be. Empathetic, vulnerable, humble, all that sort of stuff. Build a team that you keep for a long time. What? I mean, I'm surprised he hasn't sacked anybody yet. Although Gates didn't make it, did he, across the line? So that does break all the rules. Why is that? How does that? Well, because it wouldn't happen in a business. He wouldn't be allowed to get a job as a cleaner, let alone run the thing with his criminal record and. But over half the population of the United States have voted for him. So we have to take that seriously. And I think for a lot of them, on reflection, I think there's something here around Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is essentially certain things have got to be in place before you start thinking about a number of items that are less important. So certain things like security, in terms of both, have I got somewhere to live? I feel that my job's safe. I've got psychological safety in that. Have I got enough money coming in? Am I warm and comfortable? Are my family comfortable? Those are the foundations of it. And as a result, they're not motivators in themselves, but they're demotivators if you don't have them. So we kept hearing stories about the large amount of the working class out in the US who didn't feel that they had safety. They didn't feel that they had enough money coming in to feed the family and so on. So when you get to that point, it doesn't matter who's the boss. If I think they're going to make me safe, then I'll probably go for it. I'll ignore everything else. Once you've got all that, then other things start to kick in, like the ethics of my boss, who my colleagues are, my career development. My training, the tools I've got to do my job, where I live. So they become, then you get into something, and again, I'm not being political here, but something that, the trade unions will fight over, which will be some of those, but also how much time do I get on my rest day? What am I going to get paid for overtime? Those are things that come after the fundamentals. And I think what you've seen in the US, and clearly this is my own personal view, is a groundswell of people who are feeling unsafe. Immigration. This is just eroding my sense of, and it may well be, funnily enough, something that becomes more prominent in the UK.
Yeah,
if immigration is
a lot of playbook of reform, isn't there? In the UK, in terms of that, levering off that element of safety, comforts. But it was interesting. But when you look at what Trump did, he not only levered on, are you feeling unsafe, but also was heavy on, if you don't vote for me, you're going to feel worse.
Yeah.
And it was you're right. It is the party that should have attracted the people that voted for him, in theory, didn't read that audience in the way that he did. I find that fascinating.
And John, you're right, because it seems like the Democrats didn't focus on immigration in the way that perhaps people were hoping. And they were dealing with a number of issues that weren't as important as the fundamentals, as the bottom layer of Maslow. Now, maybe they'll reflect on that, but you do think, my God, you've really missed it. You're going to get beaten like that by something, because if any of us were working directly for a Mr. Trump, we'd struggle to say, yeah, well, hang on, my boss is a criminal. My boss he may sack me tomorrow. He's just sacked the whole rest of the team, which means he ends up with, as he has. I watched an interview. He did a press conference last night. The chap stood on his right was the classic yes person. So as Trump was saying something, he was furiously nodding and smiling. Furiously nodding and smiling. Don't let anyone think he doesn't agree with Mr. Trump. I desperately do. Almost like watching, North Koreans clapping. Take it out and shot if you don't clap loud enough. So I think that was quite funny, because he will, and as soon as he feels somebody doesn't see it the way he will, then he'll get somebody else in. I mean, who would you want to work for that?
I think you mentioned it last time, didn't you, Craig? It's that difference between working directly for somebody like that or seeing someone, 7, 8, 9, 10 levels above.
Exactly. You don't get so close. You can forgive that, but when you do engagement surveys, there are questions about, do you trust your leadership? And there's a question about your immediate leadership, and there's often a question about senior leadership. Even if you don't trust the senior leaders quite as much, that's not going to have as much of an impact on what's then the advocacy question, which is, would you recommend this place for somebody to work for your family or friends, as it would be if your direct boss was a nightmare. If your direct boss and colleagues were untrustworthy and everything else, no, I wouldn't want my family to work here. And as soon as I can get out, I will. So, it's that sort of distance between yourself and let's see what happens. It'll be fascinating over the next few years, and maybe a little worrying.
Let's hope not. We'll get you back at various points, Craig, just to assess it again.
I think the bit that goes from that, we talk about sort of that level of politics stuff, is what has recently developed in Syria. And the ultimate outcome for dictators. And it may be the current generation, it may be the next generation, but it never ends well for dictators. I'm trying to think who I listened to recently was saying that the case studies, eventually dictators get toppled, and it isn't pretty. Whereas in a democracy, you get it. Now, there's a difference between, a lot of it depends on how that person leads and looks after the country, because there are plenty of examples across the world of rulers who rule by divine right, if you like, and it's passed down from generation to generation, who are successful.
Yeah.
And the culture of the country accepts it and actually values it. I was always struck in the work I did in Oman, how comfortable they are having a sultan. And, it's not a democracy. There's a sort of an amount of that around the government. But ultimately, the ruler is passes down. And by the way, in a lot of cases, they go to Sandhurst.
Is that where they go?
So they get a good British military leadership training before they go and take over their countries. It's been fascinating. So we spoke before. We talked about the elections that were just happened in the UK, and the one that was about to happen in the US. At the time, I wasn't surprised that Starmer had won here at all. And ultimately, when you understand how the US election went, it's not a huge surprise that that Trump won. Although, again, unless you look at it really deeply, it challenges a lot of the stuff that we would say makes an effective, successful leader. And by the way, of course, in politics, you get elected and become a leader by virtue of what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, not
what you've done.
Yeah,
and that's going to be the key.
I think there's an element there, like you said, looking at the US side of things particularly.
Yeah.
So I certainly haven't. I don't think any of us have got a real deep connection in with the US of going, what has that last 4 years felt like in the US for the people on the ground? We're seeing those little snippets of news of little snapshots of Trump or Biden or Harris, etc., but not necessarily that feeling of what has 4 years been like, what's it feel like now as change is happening. And therefore it is difficult to assess it, isn't it, as to what that undercurrent has been there a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, and what was interesting is that one of my neighbours here spends quite a lot of time in Florida, where they has a property, and was there for a while over the time of the election. And in Florida, I said, so what's the atmosphere like after that? Because they voted Trump. He said, euphoric. They are absolutely delighted. So we'll see what comes out. But it shows, also it's really indicative of how little we really pick up being distanced from it, and what the media perhaps project, they don't.
Completely.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see, particularly with Musk getting involved. And there's obviously some massive conflicts of interest, but we won't worry about those kind of things. Yes, I think that but I think from Musk's perspective, he probably doesn't look at it from a dollar perspective. He probably looks at it more from how can I enable everything I want to do in my kind of strategic priorities. But I think his work in terms of driving efficiency through government departments, and if he doesn't fall out with Trump before he starts with that, is going to be fascinating to watch, because that's where there's huge parallels with our own readings. Is it when we've got over 500,000 staff in our own civil service now? Is it 550,000? And back in the days of when we had George as Chancellor, and we had all the, sort of post 2008, I guess it was, when we had trying to drive efficiency through the government, etc. And so they got it down to 338,000, and it's just gone up. But even, I think, is it Labour committing to get rid of, is it 10,000? It's not a massive number, or it might be 50, I don't know. But you kind of think, how can the engine of government be just so? The cost of that alone is huge. I think it's going to be, I think, so the reality is, in this Parliament, the UK, nothing's going to change. You can pretty much guarantee it'll sit around that number, because there's so much bureaucracy within that engine. If Mustard is able to make a change, I think governments around, political candidates around the world are going to be jumping on the bandwagon okay, we need to be doing this, and using that as part of their campaign.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think there's the challenge in that is not necessarily the exercise that's being done on that. It's the individual that's been chosen to do it, and and apparently the co-leader of Doge, or whatever they call themselves, or Veriswamy. I mean, you've got two massive egos working for a massive ego.
Yeah. That's why I said, if it actually comes to pass.
Exactly. I would be staggered if it lasts more than 6 months. Maybe it will. But at some stage, someone's going to fall out with someone. It might provide a link, actually, into the second bit I wanted to talk about, which was sport and egos.
There's no egos in sport, Craig, surely?
No egos in sport. If you remember last time when we spoke, we used sport as a nice little sort of model to talk about leadership in 3 chunks. And we had the first chunk, which is about building a culture, a way of working, set of principles and values, and the way things are done around here. The second part being selection for the game or the season or the campaign or whatever. Have they got the right team based on what we need, and also who we're playing against? And then the final piece, which is about game management. So based on what happens, how do I react and move my pieces around the battlefield? And we were looking at the time about Southgate, and ultimately he nearly cracked it. And just that final piece I would suggest around game management let him down a little bit. And I think that was the piece. He's going to get another job because he's so good at the first 2. But the other examples that have happened since then, which have been interesting, is Ten Hag at Manchester United, who I think has struggled. And he's gone now. Clearly, we've got the new chap in. Struggled creating a culture that meant people felt they were part of a team, that they would look out for each other, look after each other. I don't know whether I mentioned the "I'm a celebrity, get me out of here" metaphor last time, which is fascinating. It's one reality TV show I love to watch because it's great for team dynamics.
Mm.
Because what you get very quickly is a bunch of people who are going through something difficult together, who then gets isolated and says, "Hey, I want you to get covered in fish guts, cockroaches, snakes, spiders, and everything else." If the question was, would you do all that? And if you don't, you will only have beans and rice tonight. The individual will go, "I love beans and rice tonight, thanks. I'm not going to go through all that." But if the question is, none of your team are going to have any food tonight, they're going to have, I can't let them down.
Mm.
So I'm going to go the extra mile because I don't want to let my teammates down. And the respect that people have for somebody who doesn't let them down means you start building this team. So it's about what you can do for other people, not what you can do for yourself. And in a team, you've got to create that. And I think Ten Hag failed to do that. And you had a whole bunch of individuals. What you've got at the moment. Go ahead, John.
Do you think with Eric, and again, so shame we haven't got Chris here because obviously we have a. I'm not a football supporter at all. Lee's a not supporter, but probably doesn't really count.
I know. I thought we were getting on well.
Yeah,
flying.
Yeah, but from looking the outside in, it kind of felt a little bit that Ten Hag was starting to establish himself, and then with the change of ownership, there was almost as much a change of culture that came with that ownership. That almost like gave him a bit of a tidal wave, and he never really reset from that, and which almost like made his job even harder. That kind of change of leadership, change of approach, and a bit of a tsunami for him, I felt.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. Level above him, so he had to comply, and that would have made life even more difficult and undermined his position in the face of a bunch of players whose egos are very big, and they're being blown up. Their egos are being blown up even more by their agents who want to cut at this. Flip to want us to keep an eye on, and that's Liverpool with Mo Salah. Apologies for the viewers who aren't sporting fans here, but you have somebody there who's openly said, "Not sure whether I want to sign a new contract. I might go somewhere else." And so instantly they're positioning themselves bigger than the brand. You sometimes get this in commercial organisations, and forgive all the really great salespeople who are on here, but the danger is that the great salesperson and client manager says, "Oh, the clients only want me. And by the way, if you don't give me my pay rise or my promotion, I'm going to go to the competitor and I'll take the clients with me." They don't always do it, but that threat means we're bigger than the brand. I do remember at Aon, when I was working at Aon, there was a huge push in the area I was working on making sure it's about Aon, not about the person. It's about Aon.
Yeah.
And so the client buys Aon, it doesn't buy the client manager. There's got to be a balance. You've got to be bloody good. But if you've got to a point where actually you're more important than the organisation you work for, that's a problem. And we've got that, I think. Let's just see what happens. If you look at the All Black stuff, and those who haven't seen, there's a great book called Legacy, by a chap called John Kerr, which looks at the culture of the All Blacks. Chapter 6, No Dickheads, which is always a good one. But the whole point is, the shirt, everything else is bigger than me. I've got to leave this in a better place than I found it. Oh, John, I hope James Kerr gives us some commission for this.
That was after my recommendation of that. After talking to you, I think, Craig, I listened to it and did it on our book club, and then John, then you bought it, I think, didn't you?
I did, yes.
But it's a great one, that is, though, isn't it? Yeah. I think. Do you know what it springs to mind is when you talk about again, it's very early days, but you talk about the Ten Hag approach, where how he potentially, again, we'd never know the ins and outs, but how he potentially dealt with someone like Jadon Sancho, who now seems to be thriving at Chelsea. How he dealt with other big players there, Ronaldo potentially as well at the time, which, you could argue either way was good or bad for the club. But then you look at Amorim and his first big derby game, he drops Rashford and Garnacho. Yeah. And I think his statement afterwards was really interesting that, where I don't know if you saw it, where it was a team decision. It wasn't an injury decision or anything. It wasn't a tactic. It was a team decision. And I am watching everything these players do, from the way they eat their dinner, the way they tie their shoelaces, the way they integrate with the rest of their team. And it was back to that almost essence again of culture. And
it's culture. That's culture.
Mm.
By the way, as you pointed out there, John, what Amorim's got, which Ten Hag didn't have necessarily, is the absolute sponsorship and support of the leadership in the club. So you can get on and do what you like, and the players know that. So yeah, I do have to tie my shoelaces differently. Yep, you do. Do I have to turn up for the? Here's a little anecdote. We bit bigger than the club. Once went and pitched for some business with Bolton Wanderers when Sam Allardyce was there. Okay, and I'm sure if Mr. Allardyce ever hears this, he'll be okay with this. And his team, and we were going to do a pre-season camp for them. That was the aim. And we were talking about taking them to Sandhurst, funny enough, and doing a few days there. And so, in the morning, we'll get them a bit early. We'll do some early morning physical activity. They can see the sort of culture of the place and so on. A couple of the coaches sort of started to snigger a bit. So is that all right? They said, well, at the time they had a player playing for them called Campo, who come from Real Madrid. He come from Real Madrid. The big marquee signing, celebrity, everything else. And they sort of laughed and said, oh, if training starts at 10 o'clock, Campo might turn up at 10:30. But if you play for Real Madrid, that's okay. And I said, is that all right then? Is that all right? And they said, well, the owner's paid for him. He's got to play on Saturday. And so we've got no choice. So I said, well, it's pointless doing this because you've got an exception there that isn't part of the whole team. And they were saying at the time, yeah, of course, at Chelsea, if Drogba doesn't turn up on time, he drops him for Saturday. There's no way you're going to be able to drop Campo on Saturday because he turned up late.
Just undermine
bigger than the club. Bigger than the club. It's not going to work. Actually, they do quite well. But we didn't get the job, by the way. Didn't get the job. The final one on the sport one was just having a quick look at Borthwick, who's taken over as the rugby captain for England, or rugby coach for England, who's clearly working hard at building the culture. And the vibes that are coming from the players are very positive. Very positive. Where he seems to be making some errors at the moment is that final piece around game management. And, there are a lot of criticism for him when he took Marcus Smith off when he was on a fantastic game. And who knows why we're not close enough to make a comment. But in terms of the three pieces, that final one is the one that at the moment is going to undo him. He doesn't, because everyone thinks the cultural piece is.
Do you, just on that one, I was just going to say, Craig, when you look at the Borthwick sort of setup, and you look at Southgate that we talked about before, particularly in the sporting world, and possibly in the business world as well, do we expect our leaders to be too much? So when we talk about Southgate, they talked about, it'd be interesting what Tuchel does when he comes in now. Because, when Southgate went into a press conference, they were asking him everything from political background, statements, where they were playing, people's backgrounds, and then pick a team and then make decisions on the pitch. Is part of that, have you got the right people around you to support you in those decisions and to maybe have a better tactician than you to make some of those calls?
Yeah.
Or are we expecting them to do everything?
Yeah, well, it's a fair challenge. So that, as a leader, you're measured on the performance of your team, and the success of it is how they perform, not how you perform. So yeah, absolutely crucial in a business. If your CFO isn't up to it,
yeah.
As a CEO, if your CFO isn't up to it, or your chief risk officer isn't up to it, or your whatever, then you've got a real problem. And yeah, there's in the military, there's a nice, I suppose, way of looking at it, which I used to help out at a thing called the Higher Command and Staff course, which was for generals and people that have evolved since then. But we used to play the role of the staff. Okay, play the role of the staff.
Yeah.
So the commander would come in and be briefed by the staff. And the definition of the role of the staff was to allow the commander to make decisions. They are measured on the quality of the decisions, their judgment. So in reality, what happened is the commander would come in and be briefed about what's happening on the battlefield and options as to what to do next. I'll do this, I'll move that, I'll do such and such. Then where does the commander go? The commander then says, right, I'm now off And for the next 4 hours, I'm going to stand on a tank and talk to people and inspire and motivate and encourage and be seen and set the mood and the tone. Meanwhile, in the background, everyone's getting on with stuff. But if you're sucked into getting on with stuff, then you're not leading.
It goes back. We talk about it quite a lot, actually. So after you were on the podcast, I think I mentioned it to you, Craig, as well. We had a great guest on called Eamon Devlin.
Yes, yeah.
Who's has gone on. I think our podcast was the springboard for him, John. Obviously, wasn't it? 'Cause just after he spoke to us, he was talking to Carlo Ancelotti, I think, at Real Madrid. So we've helped
gave him the
push that on.
strength and depth
Definitely.
he needed to get that deal over the line.
Completely. But I think, he was phenomenal when he talked both in his background and what he's doing now. But one of the things that really struck me was, again, going back to your analogy there, but back to the sporting pieces, when he spoke to managers who stand on the touchline, as every manager does really, who stand on the touchline shouting, arguing with the fourth official, in tiny instructions to players that they don't really need, versus put that manager in the stands to watch from above as they do in rugby and not allowed to talk to the players. And I think he almost stated in a way that football managers see that, yes, they would be better in the stands, but they're having to be seen to be on the touchline by the fans, by the players, by everybody, to be that figure. Whereas actually they do a lot more. It was, it goes back to almost, bring it back to Forest, obviously, of course, because it's got to be. But we seem to, and whether it's coincidence or not, we seem to make that turning point of actually some great results came when Nuno Espirito Santo got sent off and was sent to the stands for 4 games and sees things very differently there again. But it's back to that tank analogy, doing that work, getting those people, and then taking a step back, leading from a different position.
Yeah.
And being able to
you're right. Sometimes people will talk about the dance floor and the balcony.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be on the dance floor if you're leading the whole dance. You've got to get up above and see what's going on and not get sucked into it. You do need to have enough to be able to do the press conferences and be the public face. But, once you're at the top, you're looking outwards and upwards. You're not looking as much down into the engine room. That's what your COO's doing and the team. So you've got to get that balance right. And when times get tough, then it's when you need to be doing more of the leadership. So more of the being visible, more of the standing shoulder to shoulder with people, going around, just being there, and less of the management. John, you talked about earlier on how bureaucracy can just grow and grow and grow. One of the principles I'm talking to any of my clients about is just if you're having a set of values or principles or anything else, one has to be simplicity, which is one of the principles of war. Simplicity. How can you boil it down to the next stage? If I boil this down, this is what's really important. This is what's really important. In the chat beforehand, we were talking about the success of McLaren this year. One of the interesting things for me was about data. And a few years ago, when they were a client, when I was at Aon, we went to visit. They were talking about how they start the race week with, 200 odd lines of data, which are looked at, analysed and so on back in their headquarters at Woking. Practice and qualification, it may have changed now, but practice and qualification, that data was halved. That was halved. And on race day, it went down to about 50 particular lines of data, because that's what matters at the time. Yeah. So simplifying it down to what really matters right now and not getting bogged down in the weeds is crucial to moving the whole organisation forward. And also, you as leader, freeing you up to go and lead, give you time to lead, not to be sat in a room looking at a spreadsheet or a slide and weighing the pig rather than growing the pig.
What's that? I think that
That's
McLaren
a new
one.
business analogy for me to take into 2025. Big instead of growing it.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you gotta grow it. Okay. Lee, sorry.
On that, no, I was just going to say on that. I think the McLaren one's a brilliant one, because I think if anybody had, that feels like a proper story of culture that's changed there. I think if anybody had said at the end of last season McLaren are going to win the constructors' title this year, you'd think they were mad. With the ground they had to make up. But it feels like it's the way they've done it. I know you've had some sort of interaction with them in the past, Craig, as well, to be interesting. But they seem to have done it, with Andrea Stellers, I think, has come up from internally there as well.
Yeah, yeah.
From almost not nowhere. He's obviously known, but he's not a high-profile guy that brought in. But that culture that Zach Brown's brought in.
He's unique though, Stella, as well. He's a hyper intelligent engineer, but he's also a great people leader and very empathetic. And then he's combined that with that leadership culture that Zach Brown has established, and it almost seems like my perspective, those three elements is how he's made that fundamental difference. But yeah, I'd be interested in Craig's perspective.
No, I definitely, there's a conscious effort to develop culture, to develop the way of working and a sense of team. I will make a sacrifice for the common good.
Yeah.
Rather than just for me. And so the sense of we and team is really, you can tell he does a lot of interviews, doesn't he, on race day, Zach Brown, and he uses we a lot.
Yeah.
And he's also got a mood and a tone which is very positive all the time, which rubs off. And their attention to detail is phenomenal in how they behave and perform. The 2-second pit stop in the last race, which meant they got out onto the racetrack as quick as they needed to stay ahead. That's the performance of a chap with a on the wheel. Phenomenal team performance. I think we've looked at the sport. One of the things I thought would be worth sharing, and I'm conscious of time as well, but the sort of things that have come up with my clients this year.
That'd be great, yeah.
Which seem to sort of find a bit of a trend of what's going on right now. One that I think has always been a topic, and one that has, I think, it has increased in challenge in the last few years, and that's been around meetings. Because as leaders, meetings are how we do our business. Patrick Lencioni, for people who are familiar with him and the table group and so on, will say that, in other circles, people have their operating theatres or they have a stage to perform in or whatever. As leaders, it's about meetings. That's where we spend a lot of our time. So they've got to be world class. You can't not have them. They've got to be world class. And we went from a world where everybody turned up at a meeting and you had those human dynamics of around the table or wherever you had the meeting, and you could see the little cliques that were building up, and you can see how people, with the body language of everybody and how people behaved in breakouts and so on, to one where everything, as we're talking now, a 2-dimensional set of screens. Sometimes when people switch the camera off, and that's me doing this, which I need to detail, boys, detail. So you'll have those are the sort of things that happen when you're working remotely, to a world where we've now got hybrid. So you have some people in an office working, and then some people dialing in. How do I have the same impact? If I'm somebody that spends a lot of time away from home, how do I build my network? How do I build relationships? How do I, and all that stuff? Dysfunctional meetings are an extraordinary waste of money and waste of time. So what I've been doing quite a lot of this year as a sort of theme is just helping people tighten up their bloody meetings. So, and by the way, that's not sort of nitty gritty. How do we run a 2-second pit stop? It's how do we run a pit stop? First of all, let's not go, and this is the phrase I used before, let's not go from good to great if we haven't gone from shit to not bad first. So let's start with the brilliant basics. Let's turn up on time. Let's make sure we've done what we're supposed to have done before the meeting starts, based on what we said we'd do last time. Let's make sure I've prepared my 10-minute slot properly. Let's make sure that there's a proper agenda, which is given the right amount of time for each item. Let's have somebody that stops us going down rabbit holes and spending 15, 20 minutes talking about something that's really important, but has nothing to do with this meeting. So there's all sorts of basics. And when people just make some progress in that, they're great. So meetings has been a big thing. So all the leaders out there, next year, if you want to make a big focus on the quality of your meetings. The other bit, which links to this hybrid world, is visible leadership.
Mm.
And people say, how do I have the impact I need to have as a leader? When I only see people very rarely face to face. Well, without going into too much detail, and I say that's a thing that's been picked up. One, it's make the time you're on the screen as impactful as you can. So you have to think about your game face on the screen rather than, I'm doing my emails over here while somebody else is talking about something else, or I'm just push the camera off and buggered off for 5 minutes. Even the boss, because everyone's looking at, this is my piece, what's the boss doing? So your game face is really crucial when you're here. Right down to, what am I wearing? What's it look like around me? Have I got a background? And then balancing that with, when I go into the office and when I'm with people, I need to be visible and seen. That's when I walk the floor. That's when I'm not going in there to work on a paper. I'm going in to be seen and be accessible and get everybody in. The other thing about the leadership, being visible leadership and hybrid stuff, is a lot of people now call it, my son goes in a day or two a week to what they call anchor days. I like that phrase, anchor days. So everybody in on those days.
Okay.
Everybody in
as a full business, as a full team.
Yeah. Then we can have team meetings. Then we can go for lunch together. Then we can have all the side conversations we're supposed to have. Then we can introduce people to each other. Oh, by the way, you're here. You need to meet so-and-so because they've got a potential slot coming up. And you guys, I never thought about that, but now you're here together, you can do it. So all those things happen. So you've got to have some discipline around this hybrid world. Time away, time back.
I think that's it's going back to our old world a little bit, John. It's getting that balance right, isn't it, between what to make a physical presence, and ensuring it's not just representational. And in that way of going, actually, when we're pushing people to go back into the office, particularly for global functions and global teams, are people going back into the office and then just spending 8 hours a day on video calls? Because that's what we saw. That's what we see a hell of a lot, and that's what I certainly saw when I used to go in. We'd want people in the office, but then we weren't making the most of that time in the office. And how do you get that balance right? I like that anchor day piece, actually, like you say. Those days are days when they're just specific tasks that are done in those days, not forget your virtual meetings, have those when you're working from home. Keep these as the physical presence piece. It's a really good point.
Yeah, it's crucial. The other thing about visibility and linked to it is leaders. The theme that's come up, speaking to Robert, leaders are knackered, are exhausted. Sometimes it's their own fault, sometimes it's not, but they are tired. So what we're trying to get the leaders is to work on themselves, not just getting them to work on the others. What are you doing? Where are you spending your time? How are you looking after yourself so that when you have to put your game face on, the team are seeing what you need them to see, which is somebody who's up for it, somebody who's in control, somebody's on the front foot, someone who's not panicking. So it goes back to the old phrase from the military was officers or leaders. Officers don't run because it frightens the troops. Okay. So I've got to be, I'm walking in that door. I've just had a shocking night's sleep. I've done, I've had an awful weekend and this has happened. But as I walk through that door, I've got to look good. And I've got to get my game face up. So visibility and visible leadership is a wide theme because it talks about remote, in face-to-face, one-to-one, group. Well, how are you presenting yourselves externally? Here we are looking quite casual. And the world has become more casual. I very rarely now do I put a tie on, whereas I used to put one on all the time. But how do you do it? Amarin at Manchester United. Yeah, what are you wearing? How do you look after yourself and so on?
We worked with a coach a number of years ago in a leadership team, and he had this fantastic analogy, and he spoke about tribes, and whether that's you're Amarin and you're in a tribe, or whether you're in a tribe in a construction company or you work in a bank or whatever. And each one of those tribes has a mode of outfit and dress. And ultimately, you as the leader need to be just that little better. And it's the same. It's almost like the military analogy, isn't it? In terms of, the what you wear and when you've got your epaulets, etc. That's so, I think, and what he was saying is it's that subtle distinguished difference between whether it be about your shoes or your suit if you're in an office, or the cut of the jacket you're wearing, but yeah, it's not suddenly you've all got to go and buy Armani suits, but it's actually being cognizant of the fact of, if you're trying to project leadership or aspire to leadership, you need to think about that environment that you work in and what the tribe wears, and how do you not be outrageously stand out, but how do you stand above?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, is that what example am I setting? So how would I want, how do I get on around here? Well, let's look at what the boss is wearing and doing. Well, I've got to do that. No, it's one of those things that is often undervalued, is, say, the impact that you have based on how you present yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Undoubtedly. And that goes, we talk about standards. Again, I talk about the military, but always going back to and talking about values and standards, and ensuring that you don't let them drop, and that requires a bit of discipline. I think linked to that is the final point on this little section about topics is that what I've seen even more this year is senior leadership team dysfunction. So teams, because we're not together so much, and I've always struggled. You've got to consciously work on getting a team to work as a team. But the more senior you get, the more dysfunctional you get. We talked about this, I think, with the cabinet, with Sunak at the time.
Yeah.
But creating a sense of a team at a senior level and doing those basics as a team at a senior level, which people sort of say, "Oh, I'll tell you what." I did some work last year with a senior leader of a team, and we started talking about their meetings. And he said, "Craig, we didn't pay you to come in and talk about how to run meetings. We know how to run meetings." So yes, but you're not. Yeah, you're not. Of course, we all know how we should run it, but it's about the discipline of actually running it and doing it, rather than it being chaos and then everyone whinging about it. Because I did a bit of a survey. I went and spoke to the leadership team. So what's one thing do you think as a team we could do better? So, oh my God, let's sort out our meetings. They're awful. And of course, you're wasting time. A lot of highly priced people spending time not doing much. So those were the key.
I think that team dynamic one's key as well, as you said. As teams get more senior, are they more dysfunctional? And are they, we touched on it a few times now, are they really? I heard it in, an old organisation that was worrying at times, where they said, one of the senior leaders there said, we're not a team, we're just a group of people who run our functions. And I think that's an immediate flaw in going, well, then, what are you doing? Because that team,
not
at that point,
each other.
No, and that's, are they all making each other better? Are they really supporting each other at the level, not just supporting the manager, but supporting each other? I think you're spot on. It's that dysfunctional element there.
The point at which it becomes a team is when the leader achieves a state where everybody buys into a common goal, a common purpose. If you can't identify that common purpose, then you do have to question whether you should even be meeting as a team.
Yeah.
It's not work. But if you can get that, then you can then understand, or get people to understand, that actually I might need to make a little bit of a sacrifice in my area for everybody's benefit, because I believe in what we're collectively trying to achieve. Do we have the right people on the team? Have we got the right cadence and business rhythm around how we operate? Are we looking at the right stuff?
Have we got
and are we behaving the way we should? Yeah,
definitely.
Okay,
excellent. Thank you very much, Craig. Again, I think we've covered just about every topic there. We need to get you back again, I'm sure, Craig. You're the first of our returning guests.
Yeah,
ever on here. So the only person to make 2 appearances. I'm not sure we'd have to get some merchandise for him at some point, John, so he can wear it with pride.
No, exactly. I think it's coming up to Christmas, guys. You can
branded mugs and jackets all around, I think.
But thank you very much again, Craig. It might be good to get you back. As we said at the start, I think it's almost to then look ahead to 2025 and any tips again from the learnings you've got to lead people in there. But many thanks again. A great discussion there.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you for joining us again.
You're
Hope
welcome.
everybody enjoyed listening again. As we say, Chris isn't with us today, but we have been John Lloyd, Craig Preston, our guest eagle, and myself, Lee Smith. And you've been listening to the Just About Managing podcast.
Thanks for listening to Just About Managing. To stay up to date with new episodes, remember to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts and discover what comes next on our LinkedIn page.